Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading video for Friday, April 17th, 2026, going up on a Saturday, and as has become custom, also filmed on a Saturday. Someday I do hope to go back to Friday. But anyway, I'm actually also filming later than usual when I film on Saturdays. I'm pretty sure that the weird sun and shadow part of the day is over in this part of my unit of my condo. But this also means that I'm a little later than I hoped. I may be missing out on a couple of my usual morning activities, so as I always say, let's try to keep things short and sweet, self, although it doesn't always turn out that way. But moving forward. As always with these AM reading videos, I'm starting with a short story I'm reading from a literary journal. I am currently reading from Ploughshares. This is the spring 2025 edition, and this video of AM reading brings me to the last short story in the collection. And this short story is called The Lady of the Garden by Analia Villagra. And it begins by introducing a woman named Anna who comes to Paraguay from Germany. And you know, my immediate associations with that is post-World War II, and two of the major groups that immigrated were both the Jewish refugees from the Holocaust and also Nazis. And the truth is, I couldn't quite tell who Anna and the man she ultimately lived with in Paraguay, Frederick, were. And I don't think this story really focuses that deeply on that part of the past. In fact, this is really a story about them creating a garden. So mostly I feel like I just have to put aside any of those past associations, because if, you know, there's something to glean from them, I didn't quite glean them. This is a pretty exposition-heavy story with a lot of beautiful language, which I think is apropos for a lot in this collection. And the garden really becomes alive under Anna's care, to the point where when she dies, she kind of becomes part of the garden. And Frederick marries a much younger woman named Inez, who in part comes to tend to the garden. I think, well, she really comes to tend to the garden a lot. And by this point, Frederick is known as like a poor man, but with an amazing garden. And Inez is really the one who becomes very taken with tending it. And Anna is like there in spirit or naturalism, kind of guiding her. And so, you know, we go through all of this vivid imagery, first of Anna alive and then dead in the garden, tending the garden, and then Inez in the garden past Frederick's life, but, you know, she's still there tending it. And there's sort of a ending about, some sort of folklore rumor that, there's a lady of the garden and that she has two different faces. So one looks like Anna and one looks like Inez. So yeah, it's one of those beautiful language things, but, complete exposition, no, character depth that I usually go for in fiction, so it's not quite for me. Next, I finished Happy New Year's by Maya Arad. This was one of my 2025 anticipated releases, and I also talked about it in my last AM reading video. So this is an epistolary novel where our main character is a woman named Leah Zuckerman, and she writes letters to a cohort of women she went to college with every year for 50 years, so that this novel basically encapsulates 50 years of her life. And there's sort of a framing device, a fictional framing device, where her son found the letters and got them published in a small press, and then he and his daughter write a little bit of an afterword at the end to provide their own context about, how they saw Leah. And so this worked for me. I talk sometimes about experimental writing, and I don't know if epistolary is a little bit experimental, but I feel like, what I came for, that character depth, that really showed up in these letters, just in an sort of unusual way, not your traditional narrative way. But yes, every year on Rosh Hashanah, on the Jewish New Year, Leah who settled in America after a childhood in Israel, would write her friends in Israel and give a recap of her life. And so she came to America to become a teacher, a Hebrew teacher in a small institution, although through the later letters we realized that her instructor, in fact, sent her, even without official okay, to America to get her away from a married man, because Leah had a reputation for going after unavailable men and causing trouble. And she even went after, the rumor said, after her best friend Mira's boyfriend at the time. And Mira, though, is throughout the vast majority of these letters, is the person Leah is actually closest to, because she's writing technically a letter to, half a dozen people. And so most of them, after a while, are less and less responsive. And years pass and they barely see each other, so that those relationships start to fade. But her and Mira really are the closest of the bunch, or at least from Leah's perspective. So anyway, she settles in America. She she's like in her early and then mid to late 20s and really wants to settle down. She finds a man to settle down with, and you can tell from these letters that she is in a little bit of denial in early letters, and then the truth about bad decisions comes out in later letters, that her husband actually is not the greatest man. He's a gambler. He left her in amazing debt after they divorced. They had 2 children together. And so Leah goes from the East Coast to the West Coast, somewhat following friends, starting with teaching jobs, struggling with money. She's also the sort of person that really tries to throw herself into, entrepreneurial ideas. Sometimes they're a bit questionable, like she brushes with the MLM movement and stuff like that. And then she, sort of does a major shift into trying to become a real estate agent. She's also continuing to try to date men. There's always a bit of questionability because these men tend to still be married or, unavailable in some way, like Yigal or Amnon, who were Israeli men she was with. And the thought was, they're going to divorce their wives ultimately, but who are left behind in Israel, but that never quite comes to be. And then the next most sort of damning relationship was actually her longest one, where she and this older man, American man Les, were together for almost 2 decades. But he was kind of stringing her along, and we can kind of see what type of person is now with Leah's denial about, she just sees that he's actually a very wealthy man who gives her a sort of a fairy tale kind of life with travel and luxuries, but won't tie the knot with her even after his wife dies. And you see the complications with his children. And of course we're also seeing Leah's children grow up, and Yonatan is this studious, driven young man, except he's not getting married, and that starts to concern Leah after a while. And then Ari, he goes from being sort of a boisterous child, but then he gets into trouble that, for a lot of it, Leah's kind of skirts around what the issues are, but like she says, he's an alcoholic, and there's an incident in his brief college career where he and a girl, well, the way she describes it in the moment is that the girl accuses him falsely of misconduct, and so that's how his college career ends. And he ends up working a lot of low-end jobs for the rest of his life, or at least so far as Leah can see. And then ultimately, the years move on. Occasionally there's some references to the politics and current events of the time as we move from the 60s into the 2010s. But mostly it's very personal stuff about personal lives. We see lots of ups and downs with Leah and her career and her relationships, her self-perception of things. Ultimately, she does become a grandmother, and in the last few letters, I think in a way, she sort of comes to terms with things at the end of her life. Like she admits to some realities in her past that sort of, she's much more honest with everyone on the page, which reframes a lot about who she is and why she acts the way she does and why she has the reputation she did back in Israel. That really gives a lot more depth to the story, and I appreciate it because by this point in the final couple letters, she's struggling with cancer. She is nearing the end of her life, so if there is a time when maybe people want to take stock of who they really are, that might be the time for it. I think the only thing I'm a little eye-rolly about is that Maya Arad, the author, inserted herself into the story as a character who interacts with Leia near the end of Leia's life. She is teaching writing classes at the local JCC. And, I guess I just, that sort of wink and nod thing, it never necessarily works all that well for me. I guess, I don't know, I want a little more differentiation perhaps between fact and fiction. But other than that, I just, I think I was really drawn to this. I think I'd like to give it to my mother, since this is a book basically about a young woman to senior woman's life and the things that drive her. And so I wonder if it's literary, and I hope my mother might appreciate this book as I did. Next, I am listening to The Director by Daniel Kehlmann on audio. I happen to be on the Father of Lies chapter. I am reading this book for an upcoming sisterhood book club at my synagogue, and in fact, as I'm filming, we will be meeting tomorrow, so I'll be dedicating pretty much the rest of the weekend to finishing up this audiobook. The director is also, I believe, currently shortlisted for the Man Booker International Prize. It's been translated from the German. And this is a historical retelling of a real-life Austrian director, G.W. Pabst, who actually at the start of World War II, well, right before World War II, he and his wife had gone to Hollywood. They, I think saw the changing tides in Austria and wanted to get out, and Pabst wanted to, start his career again in Hollywood, but really wasn't able to, and felt very frustrated by the choices he felt penned into. So ultimately, in the late 30s, he does decide to take his family back to Austria. Ostensibly, I think they wanted to sort of dip in quickly and get his mother out of his house. His mother is starting to suffer from dementia or needs a sanatorium. So they're hoping to get her out to Switzerland or something, and then maybe they'd go back to Hollywood, or maybe they'd go to France or something. They don't want to stay in Austria. By this point, Austria had been, taken over by the Nazis, and the entire national reality of Austria is different now. And anyway, so here they are, they're in their house. In fact, their caretakers, sort of the servants who take care of them, are all part of the Reich. And so they're kind of basically, the power structure has been shifted a bit. To make a long story short, then Germany invades Poland, all of, the borders close, all of the trains stop. So they're essentially trapped in Austria. So this story goes back and forth in chapters. Well, actually, the first couple of chapters are post-World War II, trying to set up some sort of future legacy of Pabst and his films. And then we go back to the World War II timeline. And sometimes Pabst narrates, sometimes his wife or son narrate, sometimes the people around him narrate, including Kramer, who was the operative, in fact, of the Reich, who coaxed him back into Austria, and the idea is that he will start making films for the Nazis. And so I think that's actually where I am right now. I still have a fair bit more to get through. So yeah, I think I have mixed feelings about the setup, the multi-POV part, but admittedly, now that, the danger is kind of closing in, I'm starting to get more invested. I also do think I'm going to look forward to my conversation with my book club. I imagine it might influence some of my thoughts about this book, and I'll be reporting back on that. And the final book I have to talk about is The Afterlife of Malcolm X, An Outcast Turned Icon's Enduring Impact on America by Mark Whitaker. So this is a story certainly about legacy, about the legacy of a particular man, a political and social figure from the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, Malcolm X. But I think it's more about how his legacy endures in the culture of today. I think that's what we'll be getting into when I start this book soon for the BookTube Prize. So the BookTube Prize was started by Robert Sheard in 2019 as a way for the literary community to get together and judge the best of fiction, literary fiction, and nonfiction published in the US in English the year before. So this year we are judging 2025 releases. So the BookTube Prize comes in 4 rounds. We start with a long list of 48 books and then whittle it down until we get to winners and runners-up in literary fiction and nonfiction in October. So now we are in the second of the 4 rounds, the quarterfinals. I'm an official judge, and I am judging nonfiction Group A. I am pitting this book against the 5 others in my ballot to decide which 3 I want to advance to the semifinals. But until then, I have to officially zip my lips and not give any opinion on the books. However, I did give and ramble off some preliminary thoughts on my ballot. If you're interested in that, I'll link to the video down below, as well as to the link for the BookTube Prize website itself. So that about covers it for me now. Hopefully that is short and sweet enough, and I'll go quickly get this video up and posted. And I hope to be back on this channel in the near future with an AuthorTube video, my Author's Answer video. This is a series I do monthly based off of a series of questions AuthorTuber J.D. Archer and his writing group posed to one another. Now I'm taking part, so stay tuned for that. Otherwise, the weather is certainly starting to get hotter and more consistently hot in my area, in the DC area. Spring is certainly upon us. It seems to be the good type of weather right now, where it's not too hot yet and it's not cold anymore, so that's great too. So I should take advantage and enjoy what I can of it, and I hope you can enjoy some great weather as well. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.